thank you for your work so far in the topic of Christianity. Christianity in the Middle East is very different from its Western expression, not just today, but also throughout history, because it has been in the Orthodox strain. The West has been under the Latinate and then later the Protestant influences, whereas in the East it never went through a Reformation, and it never had quite the central authority or the state backing that it had in the West, because the Muslim expansion occurred rather early in that time. So even though the old Byzantine Empire lasted for 1,000 years after Rome, it was really a very small place compared to what Rome used to be. And the Muslim Empire had grown to be as large as the Roman Empire ever was, stretching at one point all the way up into France on the one side of Europe and all the way up to Vienna on the other side. But these happened at different points in history. With regard to the Middle East, Christianity had to live under the sway of the Muslims, which it sometimes were accommodating and sometimes not, in part due to political situations. But philosophically, there was a recognition of a certain affinity or kinship, even if the practices didn't quite make sense, and even if to many outside observers of Christianity in the Muslim world, Christianity seemed to be doing some things that not only were wrong, but sometimes in direct violation of what the Muslim idea of how one should regard God would be. It seemed at some points that the Christians were worshiping 3 gods, not one. And sometimes, as with the idea of icons, it seemed like Christians were worshiping false idols, which was another no-no in the Muslim tradition. In fact, it still remains today a principal tenet in Muslim art that you do not depict things that may be confused as idols. So you don't have a lot of depictions of humans or of animals in Muslim art. You have a lot of depictions of geometric shapes, of abstract art, or even of the words of the Quran itself. I'm going to put up an article in a book that I just received, the Cambridge Companion to Arabic Philosophy. And even though it doesn't directly relate to our chapters this week, it may be useful for next week, and it may also help in going back to looking at the Judaism portion. There is a chapter in this book by a man named Stephen Harvey, and Stephen Harvey has written a comparison and contrast of Islamic philosophy and Jewish philosophy. So I'm going to scan this in and put it in the course materials. It'll probably show up next week. So look for that, and I look forward to reading what you've written on the discussion board. I'll be adding my comments shortly, and I'll also be sending along some final paper parameters so you can go ahead and take a look at that. I believe the questions for the final exam are also already up there. It's not a timed exam, it's not a one-time only that you go in exam. So you can go ahead and look at the questions and see what kinds of things you will be answering, and go ahead and make a start on the outlines for those.